welcome back to this new tutorial. So in this video, we'll learn how to create a clean architecture MVVM application where we'll fetch data from the movie database API, process the data and display using Jetpack Compose. So this is going to be a simple beginner tutorial that will teach you how to write good software and potentially give you skills to get hired. So you'll learn how to structure your app, how to use dependency injection, fetching data using Retrofit, and we'll build this amazing UI using Jetpack Compose. So without any further ado, let's get started. You grab the starter code here, you're going to get the project like this one here. So I have included several things. So one thing which I have changed inside here is the build.gradle files. So I have added several plugins here like serialization, Dagger, Hilt, and also a secret plugin that is going to help us to store our API key. Another case is inside here, I have included for navigation and different compose that are going to be essential for our project. The next case, we have the coil that is going to help us when we are loading images. Then we have retrofit, HTTP, and also logging interceptor, Kotlin serialization, and other libraries that are essential. And also you can include a splash screen if you want to also include a splash screen for this case. Another case inside here, we can go directly inside our UI. I have added these colors. So you can easily generate these colors from the theme generator. And this one is going to give you the dynamic color theme that the theme is going to adapt directly from the theme background. So if it's going to be yellow, then it's going to adapt like that. So you can see inside here, we're using these light color palettes. So the next case here inside, I have included the constants. So these one are going to be generally constants. For example, these are going to be returned by the API. So we want to convert this to a specific, for example, it's going to be a documentary, drama, family, fantasy, and so forth. So I think this is not going to be suitable when we type one by one. So I'm just going to include them here. So you can just get them. Then we have this K here. So this one is going to have the base URL, the endpoints, and everything that is going to be crucial for us when we want to actually call the API. So we are going to revisit this. And also we have here the response class, a simple CLD class that is going to be crucial when we want to get the response from Retrofit. So we know if we are successful or we have any errors, and we can basically go inside different states. So we are going to see this. This is the database which we are going to use to get our data. So this one is called TMDB database. So you can just directly go to the moviedb.org. In this website here, you can just click login here in order to log in or create an account so that you can get an account. After that, you can easily just go here to more and select API. Okay, so this offers several things. So you can see here the documentation and you can look at different things if you want to familiarize yourself with everything. So you can see you have images and other things. So for a case, we want to get an API key. So to do this, we can click this API link here, and this one is going to direct us to our API setting. And basically here you can see there is several things, and another case, you can get here your API key. So just copy that and you can go directly to Android Studio in order to get started. So after we get our API key, we're going to use Postman. So Postman is a software that is used to test your APIs. So this piece of software here is going to help us to look at the API, pass in several parameters, headers, so we can configure this with more easy. So you can see here we are passing one parameter that is the API key. Then the value here is going to be the API key which you have. So basically we are passing here the URL that is where we are going to get the data. And if you don't have Postman, you can use your browser directly in order to get this data. It's going to be easier. Now let's click here send, and we're going to get here our data. You can see we have a lot of data. Now let's click here copy. So we can copy all this JSON data and go to Android Studio. We're going to structure our application by package by features, meaning that each feature is going to have its own packages and it's going to be independent. So this one is going to help us to make our application more scalable, more testable, and also easier maintainable for us. Okay, so now let's start structuring our application. So the first case I'm going to create here is our package structure. So the first one is going to be our movie. So inside here, I want to create another package that is going to be for remote. And here I'm going to create another package that is going to be for models. Okay, so inside here, I want to use one extension, which is called Kotlin data class file from JSON. So we can easily use this. If you don't have, you can easily just go to files and directly to setting. And inside here, you can locate your plugins. And here you can search for the plugin that is called Kotlin to JSON. So you can just search here Kotlin to JSON. So you can see here, I've already installed this. So you can just install here and then you're just good to go. Let's press OK here. So let's generate this. Let's press Alt Insert, go to Kotlin data classes. Here, I'm going to paste the response that is given from our API. So another case, I want to go here inside advanced. So I want to select this with val keywords in order to initialize our DTOs. And also I want to make them nullables. Another case is the default strategy. So we can see here we have to init with default values whenever we have nullables. So we can keep them null or anything else. So this one is going to help us when we use our serialization if we have any errors. So this one is going to help us not crashing our application. Another case, you can select here annotations. So if you have different libraries, you can select here. So for a case, we're using Kotlin serialization. So make sure that this check mark is used inside Kotlin serialization in order to help you generate that. Other case here, you can see these are defaults, so you can leave them as they are. Let's press OK. Now here we can call this movie DTO and generate our files. Now you can see there are two files which have been generated. So let's inspect here our values. Now we have here our movie.dto. You can see the plugin has generated with all this serialization. And here you can see we have our results. Also we have our pages and other things. Another case, you can see the result that contains a lot of data, which is here. So I think we are good to go using these DTOs. So we have here our API, so we can create another package here. And let's call this API. Now we can use Retrofit in order to create the instance of our API service. Okay, so let's create here an interface of movie API service. So using Retrofit here, we can easily create a function that is going to help us fetch the data. So let's create here a suspendable function and we want to call this fetch. And this one is going to return us with the movie DTO. Okay, so we have to tell Retrofit, hey, we want to make this a get function. So a get function is a HTTP function that is going to help us to fetch the data from the server. So we can tell Retrofit to configure this HTTP request. So for this case, we can just call this @get. Now we have to pass in here the base URL. We have to pass in here the endpoint. So for a case, we have specified the endpoint inside our key. So we have our movie endpoint. So let's press Ctrl Q. You can see inside here our key, we have defined here base URL for image, and also we have the discover, which is just the movie endpoint that is going to be used for discovering our movies. So for this case, we can just call here movie endpoint that is going to give us that. Another case, we have to specify the API key and other things that we can use in order to configure this. But one thing, we have not set up our API key. So in order to set up our API key, we are going to use here a local properties. So when you go inside here, the local properties, you can see that we have this. So here you can specify your API key and also pass in here the API key from the TMDB database. So this one is going to help you to add more security inside your application. So this one is not generally secure, but we add another step inside our application to make our application not easier to get the API key. So how can we access our API key inside our movie app? So we have to do one modification inside here build.gradle file. So let's go directly to our build features here. So you can see we have here build features that is just compose. So we can add here our build config and we can make this to be true. Let's sync our project. So our project is built successfully. Now we can easily access here. So we can tell, hey, we want to pass in here a parameter that is just called an API key. So we can tell Retrofit, hey, create a query parameter that is going to be embedded inside our URL whenever we send every request. So we can pass in here our API key. Now let's call this API key. Okay, so we're going to initialize this using the build config, and we can pass in here our variable that is the API key. Okay, so if you are not getting this build config here, you can directly just go to build.gradle and click here clean project. Then you can clean your project, and after that you can make your project. Sometimes it can mess around with the Gradle, so this one is going to fix, and you can get the build.gradle config here. So basically now we have supplied here our API key. We can pass in here other parameters. So for example, there is these parameters. We don't want to include adult movies, so we're going to set this back to false. So here is our API service for our movie. Another endpoint which I want to get here from this movie API service is the trending movie. And we can easily use similar to how we did here. So we're going to pass in the API key, and then we are going to exclude adult movies. Then we're going to change here is the endpoint. So the endpoint is going to be for trending movies here. So you can see trending/movie. So we are going to select for each week. We can look for trending movies that are trending on that particular week. So here we are returning a movie DTO. So when we go here to our Postman, let's go to this endpoint for trending. So here you can see we are passing in here the endpoint and also the API key. Now we can try to send here our request, and you can see the result that is returned is going to be similar to what when we call this get movie here endpoint. That is going to be discovering the movies. Okay, so we have here our endpoint. So the next case which we want to do is to create our domain models. So you can see here we have our DTO, and our DTO contains the data in a format that we are actually not in need of using them. And for separations of concern, we cannot send this to our UI. And here you can see the result. Even if you inspect this data is actually nullable, so dealing with nullable values from our UI is going to be a bit challenging. So we can create a domain model that is going to help us to actually convert this. So let's do this now. Okay, so inside here our movie, I want to create one package here. And this package, let's call it data. And we want to refactor this remote here directly to our data. Okay, so next inside here our movie, we can create another package, and this package we are going to call it domain. And inside the domain package, we can create now the package for the models. Okay, so here let's create a new coding class or file, and here we are going to create a data class. Let's call this movie. Okay, so inside here we are going to have several variables. So you can see we have this backdrop path and also January IDs. So here we're going to convert them to string. When you inspect inside our movie DTO, inside here our result, for example, the January ID are going to be in terms of ints. So for a case, we are just going to convert this directly to our IDs here. Another case, the original languages, we're going to use this. Another case, original title, overview, popularity, poster path, release date, title, vote average, vote count, and video, if it contains a video or not. So now here we have our movie DTO and our movie. So what we want to do is mapping between the movie DTO to our movie data class. So how can we do this? Basically, we can create a mapper that can be easily used to map between these. But here you can see we are going to have several features, so we want to also reuse that mapper across this. So basically we can create an interface that is common inside our common package. So inside here our jet movie, we can create, for example, here another package. We can call this common, and inside here let's create a package and call it data. And inside here let's create now that interface for mapping, and here we can call our API mapper. Now this is going to be a generic one. So here we are going to have the domain, and also we are going to have, for example, the entity here. Okay, so this one is going to contain one function for us because we are not saving this to databases. So we call this map to domain. And this one is going to return the domain. Simple as that. So basically, you can create another function, for example, that is going to map from domain. So here we are mapping to the domain, and basically if you wanted, for example, something to save it inside our database, or we are making modification, we can create another function that is called map from domain and actually pass in here the domain entity and return the. So for a case, we're just going to need only one function for now. If we need again, we can just keep adding inside this interface. Then we can implement the member variables. So after this, let's go inside here, our data. And here we can create another package. Let's call this mapper implementation. And inside here, now we can create our mapper. Okay, so this class is going to inherit from the API mapper directly. The data that is going to receive here is the list of movie. It's going to be our domain entity. And the next case is actually the movie DTO. Okay, so here we have to implement that one member variable. So for a case, we want first to add these two values. So we want to format empty values whenever we have an empty string. And also we want to format the January IDs because the January are going to be in types of int. And we want to display them in terms of, for example, here inside our January constant, when you go, you can see we have a constant that is 28 that is going to be for action. So we want to convert this. So for this case, we can easily use it. Now, another case here, we can do now our mapping. So we have to override this map to domain. And this function is going to give us the movie DTO and return a list of movies. So here you can see we are getting our result. So we are mapping this result to a movie. Now we can now format all the values. So for example, if we have an empty value, then we can format it using this. The next case, we are formatting the January ID. So you can see here our function is that we are using the January constant and then we are using January by ID. Then we can return it. If it's going to be empty, then we can just return an empty list for this case. Then we can format other values, for example, original language, original title, overview, popularity. Okay, so this is how basically we map from our DTO to our domain, a movie item. Now we have our mapper. The next case, we can create our repository for communicating to our API. So for this case, let's just go directly inside our domain here so that we can separate the things. We want to create our repository. And inside here, let's create a new coding class or file. Okay, so we have here a movie repository, and then it's going to have two functions here. So the first function here is going to fetch us discover movie. So this one is going to return us with the flow. And we can use the response inside our util class to return this. And this one is going to be a list of type movie. Let's press Ctrl D. We are going to duplicate this. And instead of discover movie, here is trending movie. Okay, now let's implement here our repository. We can go directly inside our and inside here now let's create a new class. And this one is going to be the Impl of our repository. Let's implement here our variables. So we have our first function that is fetch discover movie. Okay, so inside here we're going to return a flow. The first case, we are going to emit that we are loading because we are fetching here the data. Now we can make the request to get the movie. So let's call this movie DTO. Now here we can pass in two things. So the first case, let's create here a private variable that is the movie API service. And again, here we want to get the mapper. So let's call this API mapper. And let's use here the API mapper interface. Okay, so for our case here, we want to fetch the movie, called fetch discover movie. Now we can map to the domain. So we can call here our API mapper and call map to domain. And we can pass in here our movie DTO. Now after that, we can call .apply. Then we can emit here the response that is actually applied here. So let's call here our response. Okay, so here we have emitted our success data. Now, if we receive any error, so here we can catch. Basically, we have an exception. So we can emit here the response. We can emit that response. So this way we have safeguarded our code that if there is any error that is going to occur, then we can actually depend upon this. The next case here is going to be similar, so we can just copy this. Let's press Ctrl C and paste it here. Okay, so instead here of fetching discover movie, we want to fetch trending movies in order to get this. Okay, so we have here our two functions that fetch the discover and also the trending movies. Okay, so we have created here our classes. So you can see our classes have dependencies, and here we're using a constructor injection. We want to inject these classes inside here by using a constructor. So basically we can use Dagger Hilt, or you can use any type of injection. That's why we are not passing here Dagger Hilt annotations inside this class directly, because you can substitute with different types of libraries. So you can go manually, or for example, you can go with coin. So for a case, we're going to go with Dagger Hilt. So for this case, let's just go directly here. We want to create a database module, a DI module. So let's create here our package. Let's call this DI. And this one is going to be for our modules that we're going to be creating here. So let's create here our Kotlin class. And this one is going to be an object. Let's call this movie module. Okay, so inside here we have our module. So we have to tell first Dagger Hilt, hey, this is a module. So we can call here module. Now Dagger is going to generate the modules for this class. Then we want to tell it what scope should it use. So for a case, we're just going to use this install in order to install those components. So we want to get the singleton component. Okay, so here it's going to give us the scope that this should be only once inside our lifetime of our application. So we should have a single instance of this. We don't want to create multiple of them. So there are different scopes. For example, there is an activity scope, fragment scope, and different types of scope. So for a case, we are going with singleton scope. Okay, so we can tell here Dagger Hilt, hey, whenever you encounter this, you have to provide this particular type. And this one should be singleton. So we can call here the scope at singleton. Okay, now here you can pass in the function. So for example, you can tell, hey, provide this particular movie repository. So let's call this movie repository. Okay, so when you look here at our movie repository implementation, you can see that it has two things that it depends, the movie API service and the movie mapper. So we can provide them here. An interface. So for a case, it's going to be a list of movie. So this function here is going to return the movie repository, which is an interface here. Okay, so directly here we can initialize with our movie repository. Now we can give it the movie API service, and also we can pass in here the mapper. So here we have provided, but right now Dagger Hilt doesn't know what is the movie API service and the mapper that we are saying here. So we can also provide the mappers here so Dagger Hilt can understand these two dependencies. So let's just copy these two. Let's Ctrl C. So here we're going to return the API mapper. So similarly as how we did here, let's just copy this. Let's Ctrl C. And we can directly call our API mapper, our movie API mapper implementation. Okay, lastly, we have to provide the API service actually. So let's just copy this. Let's Ctrl C, paste it here. Now let's provide the service. We're going to use here retrofit in order to create our API service. So for this case, we can call here return, and we want to use the retrofit builder. Now we can construct here the base URL. So the base URL is inside our K. So we can call here k.base URL. Another case, we want to add a converter factory. So let's call here add converter factory. So this one is going to help us to convert between JSON to Kotlin data classes. And for a case, we choose the Kotlin serialization in order to do this. So one thing which I want to do here is to declare how the Kotlin serialization is going to handle the conversion of this or serializing of JSON. So let's declare here a variable. Let's call this private val. Let's call JSON. The first case is we want to coerce input values. So this one is going to do is, for example, the data, what is going to be returned here is actually not nullable. So for example, the item is null, then our application is going to crash if that input is actually not available. So we want to coerce the input values which are coming from the server and not crashing our API. Then we can ignore unknown keys. So sometimes here it's going to return keys which are not known. That's why we choose to use nullable on our types. So if this is going to be nullable, you can see it specifies whether encounters of unknown properties in the input JSON should be ignored instead of throwing serialization exception. So that's why we're using here true in order to avoid that serialization exception. And here you can see it's going to enable coercing incorrect JSON value to the default property value if they exist. So if the value is null but the property type is non-nullable and property type as an enum type, but JSON value contains unknown enum member. So for that case, it's going to avoid us a lot of issues because of the server returning wrong data, because our application is going to crash for that case. Okay, so for that case, we are adding here our converter factory. So we can call here our JSON variable, and we can call here as converter factory here. Okay, so we have to specify the content type which we want. So for our case, the content type is actually JSON. So we can specify here a variable and we can convert this to media type. So after that, we can pass in here the content type and give it the content type to understand that, hey, we expect JSON from this server. If it's XML, then we can change it. Okay, so after that, we can call here .build and we want to create the service. So here we want to create our movie API service. And now our build is actually complete here. Okay, so to kickstart here our modules to be generated and other things, we have to provide the container. And basically, in order for Dagger Hilt to generate these containers, we have to create an application class and declare one annotation. So let's create here a new class and let's call this movie application. So this one is going to inherit from the application class. After that, we have to tell, hey, this is going to be a Hilt Android app. So here Dagger Hilt is going to understand, okay, so now I can start to generate this. Another case, we can go inside our main activity. Okay, so inside here, we have to tell Dagger Hilt, hey, this is actually an Android component. So we have to use one annotation here that is called at Android entry point. So this way, Dagger Hilt is going to generate everything, and that this is the entry point where we are going to use our dependencies. Next, we have to register here inside our manifest. Let's go inside here, and we have to register the class which we have created. So we can call here name. You can see Android Studio is actually suggesting us that we have a new application class. And since we are here, we can actually declare one permission which we require. So we can call here uses permission, and that is actually the internet permission. Otherwise, our application is going to crash if we don't have this internet permission. Okay, so we have written a tremendous amount of code. So what we want to do here is to generate and to see if our Dagger implementations here are going to be correct. Otherwise, it's going to give us exceptions so that we can fix before we continue. So our Gradle build is successfully, so everything is looking perfectly. So now we have written the backbone of our application, that is actually the data. So now we have the data inside here. We can now focus on creating our presentation layer. So for our presentation layer here, we are not going to directly create inside here our movie. So this one is for one reason. So we can keep the presentation outside of this particular package here, so that if it needs the packages from other places, we can easily just import those components. So we have the data, so we can easily reuse in other components. So say, for example, we are requiring the components of the movie from the movie detail. So basically, we can easily use that inside our UI. So we don't want to couple our UI or strictly keep them inside one package for this case. So this one is going to help us to make our application more scalable and actually reuse the components which we have. Okay, so now here we want to create our home screen. So the first case is we want to get the access to our Viewmodel. And to do that, we can easily just go inside here. Let's create a new package inside our UI. And here we are just going to call this home. And inside our home, let's create another, we're going to create another Kotlin class of file. And basically here, let's create our home view model. Okay, so this one is going to inherit from the view model class. One thing here, we have to tell Dagger Hilt, hey, this is actually a view model, so we can call Hilt view model. It's going to help us to generate that. Okay, so we have dependencies which we want inside our home view model. So to do that with Dagger Hilt, we can call here at inject. This way, it's going to inject the constructor. So let's call here inject constructor. So it's going to pass in those dependencies which we require here for us. So let's create here a private variable. Let's call this repository. And actually we need the movie repository of our repository. The next case which we want here is a state that we can easily observe inside here. So I can create here a data class that is called the home state. Okay, the first case is we can get our movies. And by default, this one is going to be an empty list. The next case is actually the trending movies. So we can change this to, now whenever we have an error, we can just pass in here this string here. Default that is going to be nullable. Okay, so we can initialize here our home state. So there are different ways of declaring state. So we are going to use a flow that is called the mutable state flow. So the first case, I'm going to make this private. So let's call this home state. And we can use here a mutable state flow. And here we are going to pass in here our home state. Okay, so I'm making this private because of one reason, because the mutable state flow here can be changed. And for example, if we expose this inside our UI directly, then we can accidentally mutate this state and actually lose the unidirectional data flow. Basically, we don't have a single source of truth. That's why our application is going to have bugs which are difficult to fix. That's why we are making this private. And luckily with Kotlin, we have a way to supply this as a read-only. So we can do here our home state and call this as a state flow. And basically this is read only. So whenever we want to mutate this home state here, it's going to give us error. And here we have our only state that we can actually mutate inside here our home view model. So if we want to mutate this state basically from our UI, we can send events directly to the view model. And the view model here is going to actually be responsible on changing the state. So here, let's create a private function. And this one is going to actually fetch the movies. Okay, so here we can use Viewmodel scope because we are going to launch a new coroutine and we want to fetch the movies. So let's call here our repository and call fetch discover movie. So we want to collect the data, but the data that is going to be returned here is actually going to be of response. So we don't want to cluster here our application with wait statement checking between different states if we are loading or there is an error or if there is anything else. So for our case here, we can easily just change. So another case here I have seen is, for example, let's create is loading. This one is going to be a Boolean. And by default, this one is going to be false. Okay, so we can easily create an extension function that can help us whenever we want to collect our data. Let's do this. Okay, so now let's go inside here our utils. And inside here, let's create a new Kotlin file. Let's call this extension. Okay, so inside here our extension function, I'm going to create here one function that is actually a suspendable function. This is a generic. So this is a flow. So you can see we are going to have a flow of response of type T. And this one is called collect and handle. So one thing which I want to pass inside here is whenever we have an error. So we can just throw an error here. So this is going to be a callback. So we are passing here a lambda. And by default, we are just going to log the error if we don't want to handle that particular error. Another case is basically whenever we are loading here, also we are passing a default lambda and also the state reducer that is going to reduce the state to something that we actually require. Okay, so these are the parameters which you require for now. Now we can call here collect. This one is going to start the collection of the flow because flow is actually called. It's not going to start to send data if we don't call collect here. Now, when we call collect here, we are going to get a response. So we can use here a when statement. Now, the when statement here is whenever we have the response, so we can have a state of an error. So we can call here our callback that is on error and pass in the error. And also if we have a success, now we can use the state reducer and pass in the data. And if we are loading, basically we can just call here the onloading in order to mimic this state here. So this extension function is going to make our code more cleaner and easier to use. So we cannot just rewrite again and again using when statement. So with this simple function here, we can easily just use it once. Okay, so now here we can call .collect. After we call that, we can call here collect and handle. So right now here we cannot handle anything. For example, if we want to directly just use the state. So here let's call here our home state and we can use .update. So using the update here, it's going to atomically update this particular state here. If we have concurrency, then this one is going to handle it for us. We can avoid rest conditions here. Okay, so we can call it .copy. So here we have the success. So we can call here is loading and basically set it back to false if it's actually well loading, and error. If we had any error, we can set this back to null, and let's pass in here the movies. So now we are just fetching the discover movies. Then we can pass in here the movies which we have. So the movie is here. Okay, so we have here our function collect and handle. So now we have two variables which we can, properties which we can inherit here. So the first case is on error. So whenever we have any errors here, we can handle it. So let's pass in here the error. Let's update here our home state. So it's loading here. We can make it to be false. We want to get the error. So let's pass in here the error and we can pass in the error message. Another case, we can pass in here whenever we are loading. So let's call this on loading. So here we can make the loading is actually true. And if previously we had errors, we can just keep it back to null. Okay, so this one is our function. So basically here we are calling collect and handle. So this is an extension function which we have created here. Then we are using all the properties which we have the on errors. So we can update our state with the error message. And here if we are loading, basically we are going to update our state. And here is the trailing lambda syntax that is used whenever we are using a state reducer. That is when we have successfully get the data. Basically, we can update our state by passing here the discover movie. So here we are fetching actually the discover movie. We can press Ctrl D and actually fetch the trending movies. Okay, so instead of using fetch discover movie here, we can call fetch trending movies directly. And here we are going to update our trending movie and get our trending movies. So we have here our state and everything is looking perfectly. Okay, so we have here our function, but we are not using them. So we want whenever we initialize our view model, we actually fetch the data. So we can call here init. And for example, we can call here fetch discover movie and directly fetch it. We can create another init block and call here fetch trending movies. So the rest here is actually creating our UI for our home screen. Okay, so right now let's go directly here and inside our UI we'll have our home, create our home screen. Here we can create a new composable now. Let's call this home screen. The next case we want to pass in here the home view model. And because we're using Hilt, we are going to use Hilt view model that is going to generate the view model directly here for us. Another case is I want to pass in here the on movie click, is that whenever we click a movie, then we are going to get the ID that is going to be of type int and it's going to return a unit. So here we're using a callback that is going to be used whenever we click a particular movie. We're having here a scrollable thing that is going to be scrolling. So let's first create this, the top thing that is going to be scrollable. Now what we can do here is actually I want to create states. So these one are going to be 3 states that we are going to use. The first case is actually auto scrolling here. So because you can see inside here, it's actually auto scrolling and we are not performing any action, but it scrolls by itself. The first case I'm going to create here the mutable state and basically this one is going to be true by default. Another case here, we having our state, that is actually our home state, and we are collecting as a state with life cycle. So this case is going to handle everything about life cycles. The next case here is we are going to get our movies, and this one is going to be our discover movies. So we're using here a pager state, and basically those pager state is going to be scrolling these items here. And here we are using is dragged. And basically we want to check if the interaction sources are going to be dragged by the user so that they cannot be interfered with our auto scrolling functionality. Okay, so in order to avoid the problem that the user is scrolling and also we are auto scrolling, we can use launch the effect here in order to guide this. So for a case, we are going to create here a launch the effect. And the key is we are going to use the pager state and the current page. So if this page is going to change, then we can check here. If is actually dragged, so we can see is dragged here. That is basically the interaction sources which we are going to receive from the pager state. That if actually the user is dragging, so we can make our auto scrolling false. And if it's not dragged, basically we can make auto scrolling back again to true. Then we can delay for 5 seconds before we are changing to the next image. And for that case, we can use here with pager state. And here is discover movies. Let's use discover movies. Okay, so we are using here with the pager state. Now we want to get the target state that if the current page state is not actually at the end, then we want to add one so that we can move. So you can see here, we are moving to the right. So for that case, if we are not at the end of our size, basically we can call current page to 1. So this one is going to go to the next page. And if we are actually not, we don't have more items to scroll automatically, then we can go back to 0 and basically start again from where we have. So here we are going to use scroll to page. So this one is actually available with the pager state. So for this case, we can directly just navigate to that and scroll. So you can use animated scroll too, but sometimes it's going to bring problems. So for my case, I'm just going to use a scroll to page. Okay, so we have here our page and the scrolling functionality is actually done. So the next case which we want to do is actually create this thing here. So we're going to use here a box. For our box, we can pass in here the modifier, and that is the default modifier which we are going to have here. Now the first case here, I want to display if we have any error, we can display it at the top. So let's call here with using animated visibility, and we can check here if the state is actually at the error state. So we can call here state.error is actually not equal to null. And here we can just create a simple text. Here we can use our error nullable, so we can say unknown. Now we can pass in here our color. Okay, so we can change here our error and we can make our max line to actually be 2 only. The next case is now to display our content. And in order to display our content, we can use another animated visibility. And here basically we want to check if we are not loading, basically show this state. And actually here we can check if, and actually the state.error. So what we want to do here is actually show our UI if we are not in an error state or we are actually in a loading state. So one thing we want to use here inside is a box with constraints, which we are going to use the box height, the body items height, so that we can configure this everything. So now let's declare here a box with constraints. Let's give it here a modifier, and we want this to fill the max size. Okay, so inside the box with constraints, actually we can obtain different things. So for example, we want to get the box height. This one is going to give us, so we can get the max height. Now we want to calculate between 2 items. So we have the top items and the body items here. So basically we have the top items, which is this one here, and also we have the bottom items, which is this one here. So we can use this to calculate between this. So we want this one to take 0.45. So we want to take this one to take 45%, and this one is going to take us 55% for this case. Okay, so now let's create our horizontal pager. So with the horizontal pager here, we can pass in the pager state. And there are other variables which we want to customize here. We can give it the content padding. Let's use the padding values. Okay, so for the padding values, I'm going to create here variables that we can use them. Okay, so we're going to have the default padding that is going to be 16 dp and the item spacing that is going to be 80 dp. So we can use them here. Now let's pass in here our default padding. Let's give it the page size and we can fill the page size. Now let's pass in here the page spacing. And for the page spacing, we can use our item spacing. This is the variable which we have declared here. Okay, so we have here our box with constraints and our pager is ready. So one thing which we want to be aware of is because the user can be scrolling or we are going to have auto scrolling. So for this case, we have to check here. If we are scrolling, then we can just auto scroll it. So let's pass in here if statement. We can use our state. If we are auto scrolling, basically we can do another thing and else here. Okay, so now here we want to create this top content here. So you can see we have the image and all these data which are going to be displayed here. So we can easily do this by creating here a component folder. Let's go inside here. Let's create a new package and here we can call components. Okay, so for our components here, let's create a new component that is going to be the top content. Okay, so this is supposed to be a file just. Let's create a new composable and let's call this top content. And for case, we want to get the movies that are directly coming here, and another case is on movie click. If we click any particular movie inside our horizontal pager, that is going to be of type int, and this one is going to return unit. Okay, so we are going to fetch the images inside our UI, and basically we're going to use coil library to load this image from our URL. So for this case, we can easily create our image request builder, and this one is easier using coil. So for coil, we are creating here an image request builder. Then we have to pass in the context, and the context is local context.current. Now we have to pass in the data, that is the URL which we are going to be fetching. So the first case, we have to get the base URL for image. So this one is different depending on different APIs. So for the TMDB API, they have this base URL. So we are going to use here the HTTP image, and we're going to select this width here. So after we get this URL, then we have to append with the poster path. And that is the path that is going to be returned with the data that we have fetched from our database. So for that case, we can append it with the movie poster path. So you can see here with our base URL, we are ending here with another mark here. Now after that, then we can go back directly to our top content here. That's why we are passing here the poster path. Okay, so we can call here crossfade, which is going to fade between our default values to this new one. So it's going to add a bit of animation, and then we can build here our image request. So now we have our image request. We can build now the image. Okay, now we are going to use here a box because we have several items which we are going to inherit here. So let's pass in here the box. Let's give it a modifier, as this is the parent composable for our data. And we want to fill the max width. And we can make this clickable. And let's invoke on movie click. And we can pass in here the movie.id. So for this case, we have to pass in using async image. And the async image is actually available using coil. So we added the coil for actually getting our image synchronously. So the first case, we have to give it the model. That is actually the request which we have built here. So the image request, now it understands where to get the image. So we are passing here the content description to be null because this is just a decorative element. Then we can give it the modifier. We want it to match the parent size. So that's why we are just giving it match parent size. Now for the content scale here, we are just using crop. So if the image is actually bigger than that, then we can just crop it in order to fit our size. Then if we have any error, then we can just print the structures in order to see it. So you can use other different things in order to manage if there is an error or anything else. Another case here, let's just import this. This is actually the image. So this one is going to be our background image that is available here. So this is just a placeholder. If we don't have an image, then we can just give this image a movie. That is just a placeholder if we don't have an image or there is an error that occurred from that particular movie. Okay, so we have created the image. Now let's deal with creating this one here. So we can create a separate composable in order to keep our composable neatly organized. So let's create here a new composable and we can call this movie detail. So here we can get the rating that is just of type double, the title that is going to be of type string, and also we can pass in here the genre that is going to be a list of string. Okay, so those are the parameters which you're going to require. Now we are going to keep everything inside the column because you can see these are just stacked on top of each other. So we can use a column to make our life more easier. Okay, now let's give it the modifier. We want to give it a padding. So we can use our default padding, which we have created. Okay, so here when you look, you can see that we have a movie card. So we have something that is going to give us this black here and then. So we can create this movie card and we are going to reuse this. So I want to create a new component for this. So for a case, let's call this movie card. Let's make this as a file. So here I'm going to create a composable. So you can see we are going to pass in here the modifier. Then we are passing the shape, the background, and the content. And here just we are creating a card that has the shape which you have specified here, the colors, and also the modifier. Now we can pass in here our content. And here we are just using a preview. So you can preview how the card is going to look. So let's just go here and preview. Okay, so here is our card. You can see now I think it's looking perfectly, which we can actually reuse it inside here. Okay, so for a movie card here, we want to create first this card here. You can see that is going to contain a 8.3. That is just the popularity of this particular movie. So let's create this movie here. Okay, so here we are creating a row. And this row, we are actually passing here the padding of 4 dp. And we want to arrange everything to the center and vertically actually center it vertically. Now we can pass in here an icon that is actually a star. Then we pass in here a spacer to give them a little bit of a space and give the rating. So the rating that is directly coming here. So you can see we have here double. So we can pass in here our rating directly. So we have our first star that is just the rating. Now we can add a little bit of a spacer to differentiate between these and other. So let's pass in here modifier. We can use item spacing. So next here we want to provide the title that you can see as here is Deadpool. So for that case we can just pass in here a text. Okay, for our text is the title. Then we are changing here the style. So for our style we want to use title large and the font weight we're going to use bold. Max line is going to be 1 and the color is going to be white. So we don't want, if the title is actually long, then it's going to cluster our UI. Now after that, let's just copy this, press Ctrl D, and we can keep it below here. Okay, so we have another spacer that is going to differentiate between the title. Okay, now we can create using another movie card. So we can create here a movie card. Now we're using another row because you can see here inside our genre, we have this inside the row, then we have items here. Okay, so basically we are aligning everything to the center. Now we can use each items. So genre is actually a list. So we can use each indexed. So we want to add the divider before each items. So for this case, if the item is not the first one, then we are going to add the divider. If it's actually the first item, then we are going not to add that divider. So you can see here we have the divider. So if this is the first item, we don't want to add here the divider, but we're going to add the divider before each item here. Okay, now after that, we can display now our text, that is the genre text. And after that, we are going to show the divider after all except the last item. So we don't want to show the divider after the last item. And because there is no any other item that is available after it. So I think here movie detail is complete. So we can try to use a preview function here in order to preview our movie. So let's create here a preview. So we are going to pass in here the rating. So let's just create this as a simple one. So you can see we are passing the rating, the title, and the genre. Now let's view what we have written here. Okay, so here is our image. So you can see we have here our rating. Then here the title is actually white. So you can see inside here our title, we made the text to be white. But because here the preview also is white, then it's not going to show this. And actually we have the actions, because here sometimes we're going to have image. So when you look here at you can see we are going to have image. So I prefer to keep this white throughout our application in order to avoid that, because the images are going to be in that sense. So I think everything is looking perfectly as how we intend. So now we can proceed with the next part. Okay, so here we have a box scope, and because box is going to stack everything on top of each other, so I'm going to create here our movie detail inside here. Let's pass in here our movie detail. So for the rating here, we can use our movie, the vote average, and here we can pass in the title. Here we can pass in here the genre. Now another case, I want to pass in here modify, because everything is going to be stacked on top of each other. So I want to modify its alignment. So first case, let's pass in here the line. And we can use the bottom. Okay, let's give it the padding. And the bottom is going to be 20 dp so that we can just move it above. Now we have everything here perfectly. So I think we can use our top content. Let's go back inside our home screen here. So if we are auto scrolling here, I want to animate the content. So by animating the content here, we can use the page as our state. So let's just, we can rename this to page. Target state, let's call here page. So if this is going to change, so let's pass in here the label. So the label here. So if you want to actually view them, you can just give it a meaningful label. Yes, I'm just going to give it null. Okay, so here we're going to have the index. Okay, so inside here, we're going to use our top content. The first case, I want to pass in here the modifier because we are inside a box scope. So you can see we are inside the box with constraints. So basically we are inside the box scope. So I want to align this to the top. So we can give it top center. And we want to give it the maximum height. So this one is going to be the minimum, and we are going to use the top item height. So the top item height is the one which we have declared here, that is going to take up 45%. Now, whenever we click the movie, then we can actually invoke our callback here. So we have here our top content. And if we are not here, the user is actually scrolling by using the gestures, then we can actually leave everything to the user. Now the page state is going to handle this. So what we can do is just add here. So we have here our movies. So we can do similarly. So we are giving it a height. Then we are giving it the state. That is the particular movie to display here. So we're going to use the page. Now we are not going to use the index. Then the rest is going to remain similar to how we used here. Okay, so now we have created our top content. So the next case is we want to create this bottom here. So you can see the bottom one contains the discover movie and the trending now. Now what we can do here, let's go directly inside our component. Let's create a new Kotlin class or file, and here let's call this body content. Let's create here our composable, call it body content. Now we can give it the movies. So the first case, we want to get the discover movies. That is going to be a list of movie. Let's press Ctrl D, and here we have our trending movies. Then we're going to have on movie click. Okay, so this one is going to be scrollable as you have seen inside our UI. So for that case, let's create our lazy column. Here we can give it the modifier as our default modifier. Now we can create our first item. Okay, so the first item here, you can see inside our body, we have here like a header title. So for this case, we're going to create a row. So we are going to create here a row. The first case, we are going to fill the max width and give it a padding of item spacing to give it a little bit of a spacing. Now we want to arrange this as horizontal space between. So basically the horizontal arrangement so that it can push them to both edges. Now after that, then we want to center them vertically. So as here what we have done, so you can see this discover movie is going to select this edge here, and this image is going to, this icon is going to go to this edge here. So that's why we're using these two parameters here. Now we are going to pass in the text, that is the discover movie, and give it the style of title large and the font weight to be bold. Now we have the icon here. That is going to be the image, what we want to click that icon. And basically we are passing here the icon, and we're using the image vector, and we can use this arrow forward. Now, if we want to actually implement the navigation to view more of these movies, basically now we can hook the on click here. So for case, we are going to leave it as how it is for now. Now we have our row. Now we can create the images that is going to be here. So we can easily just scroll here and see other movies. So we don't know how many we are going to have. So basically this is a great candidate to use a lazy row. So inside here, we can actually add a lazy row and hook it inside there. Now we can pass in here the items. Because now let's use this of list. Now let's use our discover movies. Now we can use here our cover image. So for this case, let's create a separate composable for our cover image. So inside here, our components, let's call this. So for our movie, let's create here a new composable. Another parameter here is we are going to pass in the, and then whenever we have the on movie click, so here we're going to pass in the ID and return a unit. So here we're going to make another request to fetch the image. So let's create here our image request builder as how we did before. So here we are making our image request. We are passing the data. Similarly, then we are going to use crossfeld and build our image request. The next case, let's create a box. Okay, so we can give it a size. So we want the width to be 150 dp and the height also be 250 dp. Again, we can give it a little bit of padding, so we can use item spacing. Let's make this item clickable, and we can invoke the on movie click and actually pass in here the movie ID. So the first case is we want to create our image, so we can use here async image. The first case, we are going to pass in here the model, that is the request, and the description, we're going to make it to be null because this is just decorative. Another case, we are going to give it the modifier. So we want to match the parent size, and we can give it a medium shape. So this way we can clip it to that particular shape. So when you look here inside, you can see that we have this shape. So we want to clip it and have the rounded corners. That's why we're using this clip modifier. Then we can give it a little bit of shadow in order to differentiate it with the rest of the content. So we are going to give the elevation of 4 dp. And similarly, the content scale, we can give it a center crop. Okay, so the next case which we want to do here is we have this, for example, to bookmark this. So if we are going to implement a database or a local, so basically we can add this functionality here to bookmark this. Or for example, if we have our own server that a user is going to bookmark this particular movie, then we can add that functionality. So let's add this piece of UI here. So we are creating just a movie card. And for a movie card, we are making this to be a circular shape. Then we can give it a modifier. The first case, we want to align it to the top end of this particular box. So we don't want to cluster them on top of each other. So we're going to keep it at the top left and give it a padding of 4 dp. Now we can pass in here our icon, that is just the image vector and the content description and the modifier. So this one is our movie card. Okay, so the next part which we want to add here is this title here. So you can see we have the title here at the bottom, and basically we can create a simple surface. So let's create here. So with this surface, first we are going to align it at the bottom center, and we want to fill the max width. As you can see, it's expanding totally, completing our width. Then we are going to give it the color of black, and we want to decrease the opacity to 80%. So that's why we're giving it 0.8f. Then we are going to give it the color of the content to actually be white, because here we're using color black, so we can change it directly to white so that it can be vivid and seen. Then we are going to give it a rounded corner. So the rounded corner here, we are going to actually clip it, the bottom end to be 30% and the bottom start to be 30%. So we don't want the top one to be clipped, so only the bottom we can add the corners. Now after that, then we are going to create here a box that is going to display this. Let's put this on separate line in order to see. So inside here, the box, we want to keep everything at the center. Then we can fill the max width with this particular box. Otherwise, we cannot control the placement of this particular text here, and that is the title. So we can give it the title, and we want to give it the max of one line only. So this way we have created that simple shape by using a surface. Okay, so now we have our cover image. So let's go directly inside our body content. And inside our body content, now we have our lazy scope here. So we can call our movie cover image. So for our movie, we can pass in it. So here we have a trailing lambda for our click. Let's keep it here. On movie click, I think it's more readable this way. And for our click, let's just pass in here the on movie click reference directly. Okay, so now we have our first item. So you can see we have our discover movie directly here. Now we can call our trending now. So similarly as how we did here, we used a lazy row. We used the row first to provide that title. So we can create another row here. So as how it is with this particular row, this one is going to be for our title. So you can see we have here our title. And we are doing similarly here. And the text that is going to be trending now. Now we have here our icon button that is just for clicking it. Now that is similar to how we have before. Let's just close our row. Now we can add our lazy row for trending movies. Let's just copy this. Let's press Ctrl C and go below here. And we can paste it here. Now instead of using discover movie here, we can use trending movie. Now pass everything as how it is. So we have two separate things. So you can see here, we have our trend discover movie and also we have our trending now. Okay, so we have here our body content. Let's go to our home screen. Okay, so that was our horizontal pager. Okay, so inside here, let's pass in here our body content. Okay, let's pass in here our body content. Okay, so we have here our modifier. So we want to align this to the bottom center. So to the bottom, because the horizontal pager here is going to occupy the top portion. Now after that, we can give it the height. That is the body item height, which you have declared here. So we have the box height, and here we want to take 55% of this. So for that case, we can give it the height, and the maximum is going to occupy, that is the body item height. Now here we can pass in the discover movies that are coming from our state directly, and we can pass in the reference of the on click. So our home screen is complete here. But one state which we have not used here is, you can see the first case we have handled if we have an error, that is an error state. And here also we are going to have, whenever we have our state is actually in a good state. So we are successfully getting the data. Now what if we are loading? So we can create a separate composable that we can reuse when we are loading here. So I want to create a components folder inside our UI. Let's create another package. Let's call this components. And inside here, let's create a new coding class. And I want to call this loading view. Okay, now let's create here a composable. And we can call this loading view. And here, one parameter that I'm going to pass is called isLoading. That is going to be of type Boolean. Okay, so here we're using animated visibility. If we are loading, basically that is going to be true, then we can show this. And here we're using the enter, that is fade in and expand vertically to enter. And the exit, we are going to leave it to the animated visibility to handle this for us. Okay, so here we're going to use a box. We want to fill the max width. So what we're going to do is to use a linear progress indicator to show a progress at the top. And after that, then we are going to create a surface that is going to give us a dim so that we cannot actually access the UI when we are actually in a loading state. For this case, we can just go back to our home screen. Now here, because we are using a loading view, I'm going to go outside of everything and I'm going to create a loading view. and check here is loading. So we can pass in here our state dot is loading. And now our UI is perfect. So we can try to use and test our home screen. Okay, so now we want to test run our application and see if everything is working perfectly. So let's go to our main activity. So inside our main activity here, we're using a greeting. So for a case, we're going just to delete everything here. Let's pass in here the movie, the home screen. Now we are not going to handle here the on click because we are not handling our navigation. So we're going to do this in the next steps. So for now, let's try to run our application and see the output. Okay, so here is our app launched successfully. So you can see we have our discover movie and also we have our trending now. So now everything is looking to work perfectly as how we have intended. Now one thing here which I want is, let's go to our home screen. Okay, so what I want to do here is to add actually the card. So we can go inside our body content. So you can see inside here our lazy column. Let's press Ctrl X. And inside here, let's create a card and we can fill the max width. And the rest of the content is going to be inside the card. Okay. Now let's rerun again. Okay, so now everything seems to work perfectly, but here you can see we are getting white, but we're going to fix this in the next steps. So for now we have here our movie and everything is actually displayed correctly. We have been able to create our home screen. So the next case is we want whenever we click here, then we can navigate to a next screen where we can see the detail of that particular movie. So here basically we can see the cast and crews, we can see the reviews, and also we can see more like this. So we can see another movies here. Then we can click here and go back. So I think let's do this next and see how we can build this. So in order to get the movie detail, let's go to Postman here and try to test our API. So we're going to make the request to this particular URL here. Then we're going to provide here an ID. So the ID of that particular movie. Now other two parameters which we are going to add here is the API key. So you can apply your API key. Then we are going to add this append to response, which is just a parameter that is going to give us more what we want. So you can separate this with commas. So for a case, we want to get credits and review of that particular movie to be returned in the same response. So now let's try to send here our request and see the returned output. Okay, so you can see here we have a lot of data about this particular movie. So we have production, we have credit. So you can see here we have all the actors who acted that particular movie and other things. So for a case, let's just press Ctrl copy. So let's copy this and go back to Android Studio. Okay, so inside here, we are going to create a new package. So we created a package for movies. Now let's create a new package. Now this one is going to be for movie detail. So let's call this movie detail. Okay, so we have here our models. Now we can create using Kotlin data class and JSON. Let's paste it here. Okay, so we have set everything. So we can call here our movie Detail DTO. Okay, so inside here, there'll be 12 generated files here. So the one which we want here is the movie Detail DTO. So you can see we have all the data which we are going to require. Okay, so we have our data. We want to create here for our domain so that we can create those converters. So let's create here models and create our models here. Okay, let's create here a new Kotlin file. Let's call this movie detail. Okay, so for our movie detail, I'm going to create this class here. So you can see the movie detail that is going to contain the backdrop path, the genre, the ID, original language, original title. Then we're going to have the overview, popularity, poster path, release date, title, vote average, video, cast, language, production country, reviews, and runtime. That is the amount of time that is going to be running. Then here we are going to have forecast. So this one, the cast is going to be the ID, name, gender role, character, and profile path. Then here we can split in order to get the first name and last name. So we can use this name part. Then we are going to use a splitter that is going to split between using a space. So we want 2 items. So we can get the first item by using name parts, by using the first and also getting the second item. Then here we are going to have a data class for our reviews, which are going to be hoisted inside here as a list of reviews. So this one is going to be our domain. Since we are inside here our domain, why not create here our repository? So let's create our repository. Let's create here our coding class. And here we are going to create an interface. Let's call this movie detail repository. Here we can pass in the movie ID. So the movie ID here is going to be of type int. So this one is going to return a flow. So let's create here a flow. And this one is going to be the movie detail. The next case can just fetch the movies so that we can show more movies. So instead here of returning movie detail, basically we can just return a list of movies. Here we can just remove our ID. So we have two functions that we're going to use inside our repository. Okay, let's go inside here. So we have our domain. We can create here our mapper. Let's create a new package. Let's call this mapper implementation. Here, let's create a new Kotlin file. And we want to call this. So we can inherit from our API mapper. So here we are going to have the movie detail and the movie DTO as our entity classes. Okay, so now we want to create a mapper. And as you have seen that our movie detail DTO here is going to be nullable. So we want to handle all these null cases inside here, as Kotlin is actually null safety. So we have to do this first. So I'm going to create here functions. So these functions here are going to help us to manage this. So the first case, you can see we are going to format the timestamp. So what are we going to do here? We're going to receive the timestamp according to the timestamp that we're going to receive. So you can see that time is going to be in this format here. So I'm going to use this format in order to convert this to a pattern that we are actually going to need. So here is the pattern that I have specified. So you can use any type of pattern that you want. So the first case is we want to get that formatter. So here we are going to create our output date formatter and give it the pattern of the date that we are going to receive. Then here we are going to format that past date. So for that case, we can pass it. Then here we're going to format the past date to the desired pattern that we want. Now after that, we are going to return just the formatted date. So here you can use any type of pattern, and this one is going to help you format that particular date. Another case is we want to convert minutes to hours. So here basically is to get the runtime. So for example, if our runtime is actually according to the data that is going to be returned, so we have, for example, 200 minutes. So we want to convert this in terms of hours and minutes. So that's why we are using here hours, then dividing by 60. That is going to give us the in terms of hours. So if we have 1 hour, then we are going to get that. Then the remaining minutes, we can use here this percentage sign. This one is going to give us the remainder, and the remainder is going to be in terms of minutes. When we divide this by 60, so if it's remaining 5 minutes, then we can keep it like that. So here we can format this by using hours and remaining minutes. So easier formatting. Then here we have our format empty value, similar to how we did before. So here we are checking if the item is null or empty. Then we can just return here unknown, and you can provide here the default value. So for example, unknown author, unknown anything. So you can just pass it here. Then we have to format the cast. So basically the cast that is going to be returned. So the gender here is going to be returned in terms of numbers, either 1 and 2. So we are going to check here if this is going to be 2, then this one is going to be a male actor. So we are going to call this actor. And if not, then this one is going to be actress. So that's why we are going to assign this gender role. So the first case here, we are going to return the ID. If it's null, then we are going to just return 0. Then we are going to format the name. If it's empty, so we can pass in here format empty values. Then we have the gender role, which we have already handled here. Then we are going to format also the character. Either is going to be in what character, so staying on that particular movie. And here is the profile path of that particular image. And if this is null, then we are just going to return empty list for our case. Okay, so we have this one which are going to help us to implement this. So now we can implement our function that is going to map to our domain. So here basically we are calling movie to domain, and basically this one is going to return a movie detail here. Similarly, we are just going to format the empty values so that we don't want to get nullable and deal them inside our UI. So we are going to format empty value. Then again, we are going to use genre IDs. So we can easily use a map function here and map this to a particular genre. So, we have our genre, so we can call it it.name and get that particular genre ID. Okay, the next case here, we have our ID, have the original languages, the original title, and everything else here. So you can see we are formatting empty values. We have the popularity, poster path, and other things which we have here. So we have the languages spoken, the production countries, also the reviews. Here we are going to use a map again. We're going to map from the domain entity, that is actually the reviews. Then we are going to pass in using the domain entity of our review, which we have created. So when you press Ctrl Q, you can see this is arising from our domain entity. And actually our runtime here, we can convert it by using this convert minutes to hours. So we are going to pass in here our runtime and then pass it as how we intend here. Okay, so this one is going to be our movie detail API mapper. So I think everything is looking perfect. Decrease the font. So here is the whole movie. If you want to copy it, you can just copy it one by one, or you can directly go to our project repository and go to development, and you can copy this, which is just for mapping from our domain entity to our entities which we have. So if you have problems, for example, with this cast, you can easily just rename them to cast DTO, for example, here. So because this one is going to return just cast, you can rename them to cast DTO. And also, for example, here we have the reviews. So you can change this class to reviews DTO in order to avoid conflicts when you are importing the values. So other than that, everything is looking perfectly. Okay, so now let's create our API service. Okay, inside here, let's create another package and let's call this remote. And this data, let's just keep inside here remote, refactor this. Okay, now let's go inside here remote, and we want to create another package inside here remote. And this package here is going for our API. So inside our API, let's create a new quoting class or file. Now let's call this movie detail. Okay, so this one is going to be an interface as how we did before. Okay, so one thing here, we can create a suspendable function and call this fetch movie detail. And this one is going to return movie detail DTO. Okay, so similarly, here we want to pass in the get function. So we say, hey, we want to perform a get and get the data from our database. Okay, so here we have to specify now our endpoint. And here similarly, we can just call here k.movieDetail. So we have here our endpoint, movie detail endpoint. But also we have to pass in the ID. So we can tell Retrofit, hey, we have a movie ID. So we can create here a constant that we can easily substitute whenever Retrofit is going to receive this, because this movie ID is going to be provided at runtime rather than compile time. So let's create here a private constant variable. Let's call this movie ID. Okay, so here we can use our constant, and that is the movie ID. Okay, so we are using this. Retrofit is going to use this and substitute this with the real ID at the runtime when we are making this. Okay, so how can Retrofit understand that this is supposed to be kept inside our URL? So for this case, we have to specify at path, which is going to be the path that is created when we are creating this URL and not as a parameter. So here we can call a movie ID, the constant which we have created. So we can call this movie ID, and this is of type int. Now we can make the query and other functions as how we did before. So now here we are going to pass in our API key. So we can create here a query for API key and pass in here our API key. The next case, we want to append when this response is going to be returned, we want to get the credits and the reviews. We can easily tell this database by adding here a query to response. So when we add this append to response and say, hey, we want credits and also reviews. Let's import here the build config. And here we pass in our API key. So our API service is ready. Okay, so another case which we want to get here inside that movie API service is one thing, and that is called the fetching movies, because we're going to be fetching the movies directly from our API, and this one is going to be shown below when we are going to make our request. So you can see when we go to our device here. So when we click this movie, for example, and get the detail of that particular movie, now when we go below this, you can see we are going to get more like this. So we can make another request in order to fetch it. So let's keep it inside our movie detail API service so that we can fetch also that data. Okay, so let's create here our repository now. So we have here our data. Let's create a repository implementation. So we can call this movie detail. So this one is going to inherit from the movie repository. Now we can inherit those two methods. And here basically we want to get the movie API service. So let's create a private variable and we can pass in here the mapper. So for our mapper is API mapper, we can pass in here and give it the movie detail. Another case here we can inherit is the movie we want to inject here is the API movie mapper, because we're going to map between the list of movie DTO to movie. So let's create here API movie. Let's paste it here. So instead of movie detail, here we're going to have a list of movies. Okay, so I think everything here is looking perfectly. So we can make the request similarly as how we did before. So here we can just call our flow and we can emit that we are loading. Okay, so let's call here our movie detail API service. And we want to fetch the detail of that movie. So we can pass in here the movie ID. We inherited the movie repository. We are supposed to inherit the movie detail. Okay, let's implement this. Now this one is going to be flow. Now let's emit here loading again. Okay, let's fetch here the movie. So we want to get the movie detail. So we have to call here our movie detail. We can fetch the movie ID and here we can pass in the movie ID. Now we can use here our movie API detail mapper and we want to map to domain. Let's call apply this. And here we can emit success. And here let's call catch. And here we can emit the response error. Okay, so similarly here we want to fetch movies. So the fetch movie here is going to be similar to this one. So we can just copy this. So the pattern is similar. So you can see we are having here, we are building a pattern that we are going to make fetching here, and instead of using the movie detail, fetching the movie by using the ID, now we can just fetch the movie only, and let's not pass any parameter here. Okay, so here we can use API movie mapper and map it to domain, and you can see everything is looking perfectly. So here is not a movie DTO. Let's just call this movie DTO and everything is looking perfectly for our data. Okay, so everything is complete in terms of our movie detail here. So we have our data. The next case is I want to create another module inside here for our movie detail. Okay, let's go here and create an object. Let's call this movie detail. Okay, so we have till Dagger Hilt. Hey, we are using a module and we want to create a singleton component. So inside here, we want to provide our repository. So we're going to use and provides and singleton. And here basically we're going to pass in the parameters which we want. This is the movie detail, the mapper that is going to be the mapper for movie detail, and also the movie mapper that is going to be for list of movies. Now we can construct here our repository and pass in the necessary parameters which we want. Now we have to tell, hey, how can you construct the movie detail API service, and also how it can provide the movie detail service, because this one we have already defined in another module. So Dagger Hilt is going to know how to provide it. So no need to create another implementation for this, but we have just only to provide these two. Now let's provide here our mapper. So basically we're going to use the movie detail and pass in here the movie detail mapper. Now lastly, we have to create our retrofit. So first here, we're going to declare our JSON. This one is going to help us when we are converting here our variables. So here I'm going to provide now the Detail API service. So we are going to provide the content type. So we are going to expect JSON, and here the base URL. Let's import this. Okay, so we are going to use the normal base URL, then we can pass in the converter factory, and then we can build our movie detail API service. So now our module is actually complete. So we can try to build here and see if we don't have any errors. Everything is built successfully. So the next case is we're going to deal with our UI. Okay, so in this part now we have to deal with this particular UI. So now we have to set up everything in order to create this particular UI. So this is when we can create our view model now. Okay, so for this case, let's go inside here our UI. So we have our home. Now let's create our detail. Create here a package. Let's call this detail. Now inside here our detail, let's create here a new Kotlin class and create our detail view model. Okay, so we have to tell Hilt, hey, we are using a view model. Let's call here at Hilt view model. Now let's call here at inject. In order to inject this, let's create here a new constructor. So we want to get the repository. Let's create a private variable and call this repository. And we want to get the movie detail repository. So we are passing here the interface and not the concrete implementation. The next case, I want to get the save state handle. So this one is going to help us when we're using Hilt and the Compose navigation. Then this one is going to give us automatically the save the state instance so that we can use to track the ID here. Okay, the next case here, let's define our state. Okay, now we can specify here our state. So we have our mutable and immutable state. The next case is I want to get the ID that is going to be of type int. So we can get this by using save the state handle here, and we want to get an int. So this one is going to be int. And basically we can use our constant here. So we want to call here the movie ID. And if this is going to be not available or null, then we want to return -1 so that we can know, hey, we don't have an actual ID here. So we can deal with it before sending a request. Now let's create here a private function that is going to fetch the detail. So we can fetch the detail using the ID. So let's call here a view model scope. Okay, so we did not inherit from the view model. So let's inherit here view model. Okay, now we have access to view model scope. And here the first case we want to check if the ID is actually going to be equal to null. So we can actually make the user understand that we have an error. So here we can display our error. So let's update our state and we can copy this and say is loading back to false. If by any means it is here, and then we can specify here the error. So we can say movie not found, because we know the ID is actually not available because it's -1 here. So now we have a valid ID. Now we can actually make a request. So let's use here a repository and fetch the movie detail. Now we have to pass in the ID and we want to call collect and handle. Let's just copy this, press Ctrl C, let's paste it here. Now instead of passing here, we can just pass the error directly. Okay, now we can handle the onloading here. And for loading, we have to update the state. So we can copy this, say, hey, here we are loading, and the error here, we can make this to be null. Now we have our data. Let's handle here when we have successfully gained the data. So we can update here our state is loading. We can set it back to false. And if previously we had an error, so we can set this back to null. Now we can pass in here a movie detail and pass in the movie detail. So now here we can call here our init block. Let's call this fetch movie by ID. So we can fetch here our movie. The next case is we want to update whenever we have a list of movies. So let's just duplicate this, press Ctrl D. Now let's call here fetch movies. Now we can just remove this and paste this here. Okay, so here we want just to fetch the movie, not by ID. Okay, so here we can check is movie loading. So we can set this back to false, is movie loading, and make this to be true. And the error messages, no problem. And here we can update instead of movie detail. Here we can just pass in the movies that. So let's change this also here to be just movies. We're going to make this request whenever we actually inside our UI. So we can just call this. Let's remove this private modifier here. So we'll call it in our UI if the user actually scrolls to the bottom. If the user does not scroll, no need to make this request here. So I think that makes sense for my part. Okay, now let's create here our movie detailed screen. So let's create here and call this movie detail screen. Now we can create a new composable. Call this movie detailed screen. Okay, so we can inherit here the movie view model. Next, we are going to have the on navigate back. Here we are going to have the on movie click, the user click that particular movie. And here we can have on actor click. Let's pass in here int. Okay, so we can acquire our state. So let's use here our movie detailed view model. Okay, now let's create here a box. And inside here we can pass in the modifier. And we want to fill the max width. And here we can show an error. Okay, so here we are going to use our animated visibility. If there is an error, then we can just show here our text as how we did before. The next case, we are going to use the similar approach as how we did before. So we can use here animated visibility. And we want to check if it's not loading. So we can just call here our state dot error is not equal to null. Is equal to null. So if it's null, then we have to show our content here. Okay, so here similarly we're going to use box with constraints. Now we are using here and passing the modifier and the box height, we can get the max height. Now we are going to use the top item height to occupy 40% and actually the body item height to occupy 60% for a case in order to get that balanced view. Now here we can use our state and get the movie details, and because the movie detail is actually nullable, so we can use a let scope function in Kotlin in order to access this as. So now let's start to create our top content. So you can see this is the top content which we have. We have an image here, then we have these ratings and the date, then we have these two buttons here. Now let's do this. Now let's create here our top content. We can easily do this. Let's go inside here our detail. And let's create a new package. Call this component. Okay, let's call this top content. Now we can create here a new composable. Let's call this detail top content. Another case we want to pass in here is the movie detail. Now we're going to make a request because we're going to fetch an image, and we can use similarly the image request builder here for coil in order to build our image. Now let's create a box. Now we can fill the max width. And inside here, we want to show an image. So we can create a sync image again. Okay, so here we have our model. We are making a request using the image request. Again, we can use match parent size. And we want the context scale to actually crop. And here we can just print our struct trace if we have any errors. Now here we have our drawable that is going to be a placeholder for our image. So now here we want to create this. So we have this image here. Now we can create these two items here. So what we can do, let's create another composable down here. Let's call this movie detail. So this one is going to contain the detail of that movie. Let's make this private because we're just going to use it here. Okay, so here what we want is to get the rating that is going in terms of double. and also the release date that is going to be of type string. Now we can create a column in order to make everything viewable. Let's pass in here a modifier and give it the default modifier. Now we can create a movie card. Let's call here a movie card, and we can give it a modifier. And here we can give padding horizontally by using the default padding. Okay, now what we want to create here is this. So you can see here we have the rating and the date, which is horizontally here. Okay, so now here I'm going to create rows. So the first row here is going to have this horizontal arrangement and the vertical alignment to make it center. So here we have our items. You can see we have here these items. Let me just squeeze this a little bit. Okay, so you can see this is the first item which we're going to create. So we have a row, and inside here we have these two icons. So the first row here is going to display this. So you can see we have the icon, and actually we are adding a little bit of a spacer and creating the text that is for rating. So this one is the first part here, which is just displayed. Then we are adding a little bit of a spacer to create our vertical divider. That is the divider that divides between this rating and the date. That is the code which we have kept here. So after we do this, creating that vertical divider, then we can pass in here our text, that is the release date. And the date here, basically we have already formatted it when we are mapping the data. So we are just going to add here the text. So the next case is we want to create these buttons here. So what we can do, let's create another row, because you can see we have two items there. So with this row, I want to pass in here a modifier first. Let's fill the max width and give it a padding. Okay, so we have here our row. Now we can start to create our first item here. Okay, so this first item, we're going to create a card, and the card is going to have the on click here. So the on click, if you want to actually handle this, which we are going to not handle for this video here, then we are going to give it a modifier and a weight of 1F. Because we are going to have two items, we want it to occupy the same space. Now we are going to round it. So you can see this has a rounded corner shapes. So what we want to do is to give it the top start with 30% and the bottom start with 30%, and not the end. So basically the first item here, we're going to round it, and here we're going to round it again. So when we create another button here, then this one is not going to, they are going to seem like they are intertwining together. Then we are creating another row, and this row is to actually hoist these two items here. So we are creating our icon that contains the play arrow. Then we are giving it a little bit of a space, and then we can pass in here our text. So here we have our customizable button that we have created. Now let's create the second button. Okay, so similarly for the card button here, we're going to create another card. So we are having the on click. The next case is we are changing the colors. So you can see the colors here is white, and here is going to have something like black here. So we are going to use card's default and obtain the card colors. Now we change the container color. So we want this to be actually white. Now what we want to have here is the primarily light color. So we can import this. So this is the primarily light high contrast color that is going to give us this particular color here. That is the content. Then we are going to give it the weight also of 1F, similarly as how we did here. Then the shapes, we are going to change it. So here we used top start. Now we are going to use top end and bottom end in order to create that rounded shape. For this case, we have another card that we have managed to create. What we can do, let's go inside here our detailed component. Now below this, we are going to create our movie detail. Let's create here our movie detailed component. Now here we can pass in the rating. So we can use the vote average. And the release date here, we can use our movie detail. Now one thing which we want to change here is actually the modifier. Let's give it a modifier. And we want to change the alignment. So we can call here alignment. Let's give it bottom start. Okay, so we can align it to the bottom and the start of this particular view here. Okay, so we can go directly here inside our box with constraints. Now we can create our detail top content. Now let's pass in here our movie detail. The next case, we can change the modifier. So we want to change the height and other things. So let's give it modifier and give it the height. Now we can call here our top height, item height. Okay, and then we want to align it to the top center because we're using here a box. So Let's call this alignment.top center to align this particular detail component the top. Now, when we look here at our view, we have our first item. Now, the next item which we want to implement here is actually this detailed section here. So we can create the detailed body content. Okay, so now let's create here our detailed composable. So what we can do, let's go here and inside our component, let's create a new coding class of file. Call this detailed body. So let's create here our composable. Now here we want to get the movie detail. So we can pass in here our movie detailed. Another case, we want to get the movies. So this one is going to be a list. The next case is we can check if the movie is loading. Now we can have here a function that is going to fetch movies. This one is just going to be a callback. Another case is the on movie click. And this one is going to give us the ID that is going to be of type int. And another case is on actor click. And here, because our item is actually scrollable, so I'm going to create a lazy column to hoist all of the items. Now we can give this the modifier, and here we can have our first item. Okay, now let's surround everything with a card, and here we want to fill the max width. Okay, so inside here, let me create a column that is going to keep everything hidden. Okay, let's pass in here a modifier, and give it fill max width, and we want to give it padding, and actually we can use the default padding for our item. Okay, so we have here our layout setup. So the first case is we want to display this. You can see we have science fiction, then we have a dot, action, dot, adventure, and then here we have our runtime, that is the hours of this particular movie. So this one is 1 hour and 49 minutes. Okay, so here is our view. So we are using here row. So you can see this row is going to hoist all of these two. So we have two items. So the first case, we want to arrange them space between so that we can push between these three items and this time here. And then we are going to center everything vertically and we want to fill the max width. Now after that, we are going to create another row. So this row is going to hoist between these items here. So you can see inside here, we are going to use our January IDs. So the January IDs, then we are going to loop through each items. So for each indexed, so we can get the index and the January text. So we can create here our text. So the first text here, we're going to display the January ID, give it a modifier, and we want it to occupy only one line. And then we're going to use body small for our style. So you can see here it's small so that we can create a visual hierarchy. The next case here, we want to show a divider, and we want to show the dividers after all except the last items. So we can see here we have science fiction, then we have this small divider here, like a dot. And this dot in Java or Kotlin, you can easily use this /u 2022 in order to get that particular dot to be rendered inside your view. And here we are using also type small to change the style. So these two cases, we have our dot and creating our first row. Now, after we create this row here, then we can display those 3 or 4 items. It depends on that particular movies and the genre it has. Some have only one, some has more than one. Now, another case here, we have the runtime, which is basically the runtime that is going to be shown here. And similarly, we are going to use body small. So that is the first case, is displaying this particular item here. Okay, so the next case here, we want to create this title here. We can create a spacer. And let's give it a height. Here we can use item spacing. Now we can add that title here. So I'm going to create a text. So we are passing here the movie detailed. Now the style, we want to use title large here for our typography. So we can use material theme, typography title large. Then the font weight is going to be bold. Now after that, let's add a little bit of a spacer after the text here. So the next case is we want to create this overview here. So for our overview, we can just add this text here. So you can see we are going to use this movie detail.overview. Then we are going to change the typography here to use body medium. Again, we can create a spacer. Let's keep it below here. Okay, so now here we have our overview and everything here is complete. So the next case, we want to create these action buttons here. So you can easily create these action buttons here, and let's create another class below here. This one is going to be outside. Let's add here. This is basically our enum class. So you can see we are creating this action icon. So here we are passing the image vector to be our icon, and the content description here is our content description. Then we can create the first icon is bookmark. Then we have the share, and then we have the downloads. So you can see we are using here the bookmark, the share icons, and the downloads icon. So these ones are going to be easier for us when we want to use it here. So let's come back here and create our icons using that action. So the next case, you can see we have these actions here. So we can customize the background and other things by creating our custom icon button. So let's create here our action icon button. So we are passing here the modifier. Then we are creating here the image vector, the content description, and the background color that is going to be black. For a case, let's import here the movie card, which we have already created. The shape here, we are going to give it circular shape. And another case is we are going to change the modifier and give it a 4dp padding in order to give it a little bit of a spacing. And the background image here, the background color, we are going to change it here. And after that, we are passing here an icon with that particular items which we have provided here. So for this case, we can try to use this inside here. Okay, so here we are going to create another row. So you can see there are 3 items here. We're filling the max width with this particular row. Then we're going to use the actions. And because it's an enum, we can call .entries in order to access this as a list. So we're going to use indexed. So we get here the index and the action icon as our reference. Now we can call here our action button and pass in the variables. Okay, so here we are changing the background color. So you can see the background color. If this is not going to be the last index, basically we are going to use the black. So you can see here what we are using. You can see we are using these black colors. And if it's going to be the last index, basically we are going to use the primary. So you can see this color here is different other than the others. So that's why we're using here a function, a simple if function. Okay, so here we have our row. So we have created these items here. So the next case, we want to create this cast and cruise title here. Okay, so we can duplicate this. Let's press Ctrl D and keep it below here. So we want to keep it outside. Okay, so we have our spacer here to differentiate this. The next case, we are going to also create this item here, which is cast and cruise. So we have done this before. We can easily just use a row. Okay, so inside here, we are creating another row that is going to fill the max width. And then we are giving it a padding of horizontally to have the item spacing so that we can bring it to inside here. So we're giving it horizontally. Another case, we want to arrange it horizontally with a space between so that it can push each item to the corners. And then we are going to center it vertically. The next case here is we are creating our first text that is just cast and cruise. You can see we are changing here this to use title large and the font weight to be bold. To create that visual hierarchy for our case, then we have here the icon button that can be used to navigate to see more cast and cruise for this if we want to implement that particular screen. Now we have here our icon, and the icon is just a simple icon as normally we do. Okay, so after we create this, now the next case here which we have to deal is the actor here. So you can see this is actually scrollable, and basically the great candidate for this is actually creating a lazy column. Okay, so let's collapse this first. Create a lazy column, lazy row, sorry. And inside here, we can create items by using a list, and we can use now our movie details, and we want to actually get the cast. Now we can create the actor item here. So we can create a separate composable for this. Okay, let's go inside here, our components. Let's create a new quoting class or file. Let's call this actor item. Okay, now let's create a new composable. So for our actor here, we want to pass in other variables, and the variable here is just the cast. Okay, so the first case you can see here, we are going to use an image. So we want to actually make a request in order to get that actor image here. And basically everything is arranged inside the column here, as you can see. Now let's make a request here, and we're going to use coil for this case to build our request. Now after this, we can create here our column. Let's give it a modifier. So we want to arrange everything to the center, as you can see there. Then we can give it the horizontal alignment, and we want to align it center horizontally. The first case here, we can display our image, and that is just the async image from coil. So we are making a request. The content description is going to be null. Then we are going to provide here the modifier, and the size we want it to be 48 dp. And here we want to clip this to be in a circular shape. So for that case, we can pass in here clip and pass in circular shape in order to make it in a rounded corner, as how it is viewed here. Now after that, then we are going to crop this scale uniformly if the image is going to be bigger than our size. And if we have any error, then we can print our struct trace. Then here we can pass in a placeholder. Let's import this. So we are going to use this baseline person. So you can see this one here to be as our placeholder. So when you scroll here, you can see that is our placeholder. Then it's going to fetch that image. Okay, the next case here, we want to create our text, and this text here is going to be the gender role. So you can see if this is actually an actor or an actress. So you can see if this is a woman, it's going to be actress. So for a case, we're going to use this gender role here to display that. Then this one is going to be of body medium. Now after that, we can add a little bit of a spacer to differentiate this. Let's pass in here a spacer and give it a modifier and give it a height, and we want it to be 4 dp, just small spacer between that. Next case, we want to display the first name and the last name here. So we can display here our first name. We are going to use body, this one body large. So we are passing here cast.firstName. Then we are going to use body large for our style, and we can make it bold. Now we can add for, let's place Ctrl D. Instead of first name here, we can call last name. So I think our actor item is actually completed. Let's go to our detailed body content. Now let's create here our actor item. So we can pass in here the cast, that is it. Another case, let's pass in here the modifier. Let's give it a weight of 1F. Let's make this clickable. And when this is going to be clicked, so we can invoke on actor click. And here we can pass in the ID. Now we want to add a little bit of a spacer between these items here. So when they are rendered here, we can create a spacer. Now we can use a width instead of height because we are inside a residual. And here we can call default padding. Okay, so here we have our custom crews, everything ready. So the next case is we want to create this spoken language, and here production countries. So you can see there is a little bit of formatting here is happening. Okay, so the first case, we can just press Ctrl D. Let's put this below here. Okay, so we want a little bit of a spacer between these custom crews and the spoken languages here. So I'm going to create a separate composable that is going to help us to do this simple item here. So this composable is going to be called the movie info item. So here is we are going to pass in the info items in terms of list of a string, and then we want the title of that info item. So if we have here the spoken languages, so for that case, we're going to create a simple row, and that row is going to be these items here. And you can see we are centering vertically, and arrangement is going to be center. Then we're going to display our first text here. Then we add a spacer. Now after that, then we can create here our info items, and for each we are going to display that info items. So if we have more than one item, then we can actually show them here. So for that case, we can just go back inside here. Okay, so below this lazy row, we are going to create our movie info item. So the first info that we want to display here, we can call movie detailed.languages. So you can see the language is actually a list, and the title here, we can write just spoken language. Let's duplicate this. Here also, we can duplicate this. and put it below. Okay, so here we have another info item that is going to be for production countries. So we can change this. And instead of languages here, we can pass in the production countries that have been produced from here. Okay, so our info item that is going to display this detail. Now the next case is to display the reviews. So what we can do, let's press Ctrl D. Now for our review, we can create here a text that is going to be the review text. And here we can change the style. Let's use title large for the title that is reviews. Then we can change the font weight and we want this to be bold also. Now also we can create here a spacer below this. Now we can create a separate composable that is going to display the reviews. Okay, so we have finished to create here our info items. So the next case we want to deal with the reviews. And here you can see there is a bit of formatting which we are doing. So you can see, for example, this one, we have a see more button. Whenever I click this, then we have a full review that is written. And if somebody doesn't want, then we cannot just show. And here we have mainly 3. And if we want to view more reviews that are available, we can just click here more and collapse. So you can see there is a bit of something that is happening here. So let's create here a review. So the first case, let's create this collapsing text that is going to be used here. So we can go directly to our UI components. Let's create a new Kotlin class of file. And here we can just call this. So with our collapsible text here. Okay, so here we can going to pass in the collapsible. So how many lines we want to be here in order to collapse. So for a case here, the max is going to be 3. If we have more than 3, then we are going to make it collapsible. Let's give it here our style. And by default, you can give it body medium. So if you want to change it, then you can change it more than how you wish. Okay, the next case here is we want to create a state that is if we are in an expanded state or not. So by default, we are going to start with expanded. That is not expanded. Okay, so here we are going to create a builder of a string. So we're going to use annotated string. So the annotated string here is going to help us. So if we are not in expanded, we want to append the text with see more. And if not, then we are going to append this with see less. So below here, I'm going to create a column with 2 text. So you can approach this differently. But for my case, I'm just going to take this here. And here I did not add the text. That is going to be the actual text. Okay, so here we have our text. And basically we're using the modifier. And this one, we are making it clickable. So if we click this text, then we're going to change the is expanded state. And actually the max line, if it's going to be expanded, we are going to use the max values. And else we are going to use the collapsed line, which we have specified here. For our case, it's just 3. So if you want to change that, you can change it if it's 2 or 1. So for our case, let's go with 3. And if there is more, then we can add ellipses. And here we can pass in our style. Then here we can pass in our button, that is just our annotated text. If it's actually here, we can change if it's see more and see less. So for example, if we click this, you can see that we can click again, see less and see more. So that is how we are going to approach this here. We have here our collapsed state. Now we can go and create our review. Let's go inside our detailed and create here another component. Click Alt Insert. Let's create a review. Okay, so for our review here, we want to pass in another parameter that is actually the review. And here I'm going to create a column that is going to hold all the reviews. Let's give this the modifier, the default modifier. If we want to change anything else, then we can use this modifier here. Okay, so the first case, we want to create this text here. So we can approach using a row and create this, or we can use annotated build string. And this one is going to be easier. So for example, here, I'm going to create this name annotated string. So you can see we are using here build annotation. Then we are going to append the review, that is the author of that review. Then here we are going to add a dot. So you can use that /U2020. So in order to get that review here, so you can get it. And after that, then we are going to create created art. So this is the date, that particular review, and when it was created. So after we append this, then we can create another annotated string to actually display this and use a text to create it. Okay, so another case, I'm going to create here another annotated string. So here you can see we have our string. This one is going to be for our rating. So you can see the rating here as a star. Then we have this simple annotation here, which is occurring, and that is because we are using annotations. So the first case, we are going to push the style, that is to make the bold for the first time. And here we are going to use our review. So we're using a round. This is a Kotlin function that if this one is going to be, for example, 5.11132, then we want to round it to one figure. If it's 2.0, 2.1, 2.5, then we can use this round function. Then after that, we are going to pass in here the review rating, that is the rating, and make it to a string so that we can, so you can see, round to the nearest int. And after that, we are going to pop after we applied this style. So you can see we pushed the style. Now we are ending the bold by calling pop in order to remove that item or styling, which we have done. Now we want to apply a small style. So we are going to push here another style, that is actually this font size to be 10. So you can see that is smaller than these two. Then we can append here that is going to be out of 10. And then we are going to pop that style so that we cannot affect the future of other styling that we have. So for that case, we can easily do this in order to add our styling by using annotations. So we have the annotations here and the styling ready. So let's create here our text. And basically we are passing here the annotated text, which is this one. Now let's add here a little bit of a spacer. So we can use here a modifier. Now I want to use that collapsible state. So the text which we have created here. So we can use it in order to have that functionality. So we can create here a collapsible state. So let's import this. So we can pass in here our text. And the style we can change, we have the body large. So you can customize it as how you want, but for a case, we are going to use this way. So lastly, here we have our icon here and the text that are going to be displayed here. So we can use a row in order to display these two things. So let's create here a row. So you can see we are using here horizontal arrangement, center, and the vertical alignment, we are going to center it vertically. Now we can pass in here the icon, that is going to be the star. And after that, then we are going to pass in here the rating annotated string. And then we can give it the style to have the body small. View is complete here. So to recap, we have created our annotated string that is for the name and the created time, which we have appended here. Then we created another annotated string that is going to be used for our icon here and displaying the ratings. Now after that, then we are creating here the text to actually display that name and the time created. Then we are creating the collapsible state for the content of the actual rating that is provided. So after that, then we are going to create the row to actually display the actual rating that user has provided for that particular movie. Review item here is complete, and I think we can make this and call it review item. Okay, so we have here a review item, so we can go back to our detailed body content here. So inside our detailed body content, what we want to show here is, for example, we have only maximum of 3 at the first. So if somebody wants to view more, then they can have this dedicated button here to actually view more. Here, let's create another composable. And let's call this just review. Let's make this private. And here, instead, we want to pass in the list of reviews. So we can just call this reviews. And this one is going to be a list of review. Now here we can declare a state to actually view more. And here we can have a mutable state of false. Okay, so here is our state. So here is what we are going to do. So basically, we are going to create first the default reviews. So we want to show only 3 reviews or less by default. So for this case, if the size of the review is going to be greater than 3, then we are going to just take 3 of these. And else we are just going to return the reviews if that is not going to be greater than 3. So if we have more than 3, then we want to take only the first 3 reviews. Now here we are going to show more reviews when user actually need it. So here we have the view modes, so we can return the reviews, and also we can return default reviews. So view more here is going to be the action that we have defined here. By default, that is false. So we are going to return these default reviews. And if the user is going to change this state here to true, then we can return all the reviews here. And here we can configure our button text to actually be collapsed and more. Then we are creating here a column. That column is going to give us all the reviews that are available for now. So we have here our reviews, then using a for each index. Then we can use the review item that we have created previously and pass in here a single review item. Then we can add a little bit of a spacer and add a horizontal divider that is going to divide between those 3 reviews which we have. Then we can add another spacer that is to add a little bit of a spacing between the items. Now after that, we are going to add this button, that button which is going to be collapsing. So you can see here, we have this button. When we click this button, actually it's going to be collapsed and expanded. So this is the button that what we are setting here. Okay, so let's go back to our detailed body content here. Okay, so here we have our text for review. Then after this text for review, now we can display our review actually. Let's pass in here our composable for review. Now let's call here movie details dot review. And this one is going to give us our reviews. Now let's press Ctrl D and give it a spacer. Here we want to display, so you can see when you open up, after this one, we are going to have more like this. So you can create a separate composable to display that. So what we want to do here is actually to fetch the movie. So we can call this fetch movies, and we can check is movie loading. Here we can create now the list of movies and the on movie click. So if we click this particular movie, we want to actually navigate here. The first case is we want to use a launch the effect because we have viewed this composable here. So we can make it to actually be executed only once. So we can call here fetch movies. Now it's going to be fetched. So whenever this is going to be created, this composable, it's going to actually execute that fetching of the movie only once. Okay, so now here I'm going to create a text that is going to read more like this. And here we can create this by using title large and the font weight to be bold. Now after that, we are going to create a lazy row. Now the first item here, which I want to show inside our lazy row, is if we have loading. So we can call here animated visibility. And the visibility here is we can check if the movie is actually loading. If it's true, so we can just show here a circular progress indicator. We don't have any progress, so we want it to be infinite. Now after that, we can use our items. And that is just a list of items. And here we can pass in the movies. Okay, so we have already created the movie cover image from our previous screen, so we can reuse it. So let's call here movie cover image. And for the movie here, we can pass in it. And here we want to pass in the reference for the on movie click. So let's call here on movie click. We can call here on movie click actually. Okay, so I think we can surround everything here. Let's press Ctrl Alt J. Let's surround this with a column. I think that is going to be more intuitive. Let's pass in here the modifier and give this the modifier here. So I think more like this is actually completed here. So let's go inside here and we can go below. So here we can call more like this. So to fetch the movie, we can just pass in here fetch movies, and actually is loading. We can check is movie loading, and here we can pass in the movies. That is the list of movies which we are going to have. Then this, let's move it here so that we can make this more readable. movie click, and we can pass in the reference for the movie click. Our detail body is actually completed, so we can go back to our movie detail. So inside here, movie detailed, we created our detailed top content before. So for now, we can create our detailed body content. So let's create here our detailed body content. Let's pass in here the movie detailed. And here we can get the state.movies, that is. And actually here also we can call state.isLoading. It's movie loading. Then we want to fetch here. So basically to fetch, we can just call our Viewmodel directory and we can fetch the movies. And now they're on movie click here. Okay, so we have one thing which we have to implement here. On actor click, we can just call here on actor click. First case, we can modify the alignment. So we want to align it to the bottom center, and then we can give it the height. So we want to use the body item height, and we can arrange it. So now I think here our detailed is actually completed. Now one thing which we have to implement is this particular button here. So you can see we have the button that is going to be used whenever we want to click this and navigate away. So let's create here the icon button, and here we can call on navigate up. We can modify it by passing here the modifier, change the alignment. We want to align it to the top start. Now we can pass in here the icon. Okay, so for the image vector, we can use icons, but auto mirrored. Okay, so here we have our icon. The next case is we want, whenever we are here, we want to be loading. So we can call here our loading view and use isLoading. So we can call here our state.isLoading. Because this is the box, everything is going to work perfectly. Okay, so our movie screen here is complete. So the next case which we want to do here is to create the navigation. So we have here the detailed and the home screen. So I think we can create here our navigation. Let's create here a new package. Let's call this navigation. Now inside here, we are going to create one class. So this class here is going to be the route. Okay, so this route here is going to contain two screens. The first screen here is our home screen, and the next screen is going to be the film screen or the detailed screen. So here we have our route, and then we're going to have the route with arguments. So the route with arguments here is when we want to pass in here the ID. So here we are going to pass in the route, then we are adding here a slash, then passing here the constant. So the constant, this one is going to be replaced. So you can see we have this movie ID here. So let's go back here to our route. Then we are going to have a separate function that is going to give us the route with argument so that we can easily navigate from each classes here. Okay, so now let's create here our movie navigation graph. Okay, so here I want to get the nav host controller. Okay, now let's create here our navigation host. We can give it the nav host, so the nav controller, and the graph which we want to get here. So we're going to create this graph outside. So here we want to pass in the start destination. And for here, our start destination, we can use the route, and we can call .route. So that is our start destination. Okay, now let's create here our composable. Okay, so with this, we can customize here the inter-transition. So let's customize our inter-transition, and here we can call fade in plus fill in. And for our exit transition, so let's pass in here exit transition. We want to use fade out. Okay, so after we customize that, then we can use here our home screen. Let's directly call here our home screen. And here we have the on click. So let's put this inside our. So here we want to navigate to the film action. So I'm going to use this nav controller. So we want to navigate to the film screen. So we're going to call here get route with arguments. Then we pass in the ID because here on movie click, we're going to pass in the ID. Now we want to only launch a single top. This way we can avoid multiple backstack of the same item inside our backstack. Then we want to pop up everything until the start destination. So we can make this to be the ID, meaning that it's going to be the start destination is our home screen. We don't want to make it inclusive, so we can make it false. So if we are inside our detailed screen, then when we press back button, then we are going to navigate back to our home screen. If you want to quit entirely, you can make this to be true. But for our case, we're going to leave it as how it is. Now let's create another composable that is going to be for our film screen. So, or our detailed screen, whatever you want to call it. Create here our composable. So we can pass in here the route. So we can call route with arguments. Okay, so here we have to tell the composable what arguments are we expecting. So we can call here the list of argument and pass in here the list of argument. Now let's pass in here the nav arguments. So the name here, we are going to call here the movie ID that we have passed here. And we can specify the type. Say this is going to be an int. Okay, so inside here, we are going to call our movie detailed screen. Okay, so when we call here on navigate back, so we can use our nav controller and call here navigate up. Okay, so when we click the movie again, so we can just copy what we have done here inside the on movie click. So let's just copy this, press Ctrl C. Similarly, we are going to do it here inside our movie click. So we are inside the detailed screen. When we have that more like this, when we click that, we want also to navigate to another movie because we have a different ID. So we can call that here. And the actor icon, because we have not created the actors screen, then we cannot navigate there. Okay, now here we have our navigation host. Put this here. So we can give it the modifier and we can call this fill max size. Okay, so now we can go inside our main activity. So inside our main activity here, I'm going to create another function. Let's create here a new composable. And that is going to be called app. Okay, so no need to pass in here the modifier. First case, we want to call here the nav controller. Okay, so we want to call remember nav controller. Then we can pass in here the scaffold and we can fill the max size. Now let's pass in here our movie navigation graph. So we can give it the nav controller. Then here we want to pass in the modifier, give it the padding, and we can just pass in here it to remove that error. Now directly inside here, instead of just calling our home screen, let's call our app. Now let's execute again our file. So now our app is launched successfully. Now let's look here. Okay, so you can see everything is looking perfectly as how we intended. Now let's try to click this at the wild robot. You can see we are navigating. Now you can see we have here a wild robot. Okay, so one thing which I'm seeing here is we have to remove this. So we can fix it, but I think everything here. You can see the animation, science fiction, family. We have here a wild robot. So the cast and crews also is displayed. You can see the spoken languages. And here we have our reviews. We have our action. We can click here to view more. Okay, so this is a very long review. Okay, so I think here there are things which we have to fix. You can see this is still loading here. First case, we want to hide this loading spinner here. So what we can do, let's go to our detailed view model. Okay, we can press Ctrl E and search for the detailed view model. Let's go here. Okay, so inside here, our detailed view model, you can see we are changing here is loading. That loading is for the general here. So we have another one that is actually is movie loading. And we can change it here to make it back to false. I think that we are going to fix it. Another case, you can see here we are expanding this. We want only this to be for this item here only. So here, let's go to the top content. Inside our detail. Okay, let's go to our movie detailed component here. So what we can do, let's press Ctrl X. We want the movie card to only contain that. So outside of the movie card, we can paste in here to have the rest of the detailed. Okay, so I think now everything is looking perfectly. So the movie card has its own item, and also this has its own item here. Okay, now let's try to rerun again. Okay, now our app is launched again. So go with this one here. Okay, so now everything is looking perfectly. So we have here our wild robot. This is the rating. We have our button here. Now we have the rest of the items. That's how it is. Now here we have more like this. Take for example this one here. Okay, so we are navigating then back. You can see we have this movie also. So I think everything is actually working as how we intend. Let's click this back button here. Now it's navigating back to our home screen. So I think everything is looking perfectly as how we intend. Guys, I hope you have enjoyed so far. So I think let's leave it here for this video. So if you find this video actually helpful, please don't forget to provide a like, subscribe and share to others so that they can learn more. If you want to learn more about clean architecture and using Jetpack Compose, I have the courses which goes in more details about these topics. So you can find the link in the description box below. So until next time guys, bye bye, see you in the next video.